Darn it, it's going to the cloud anyways, guys. Let's hope I can get it back. I can learn how to fly here. All right, everyone, welcome to our September, one of our September virtual conversations here, hosted by Chicago Sales Enablement Society. I am Shannon Sellis. I am a board member here with the Chicago Sales Enablement Society and have been for about a year and a half now. Love my enablement. If you know me, you know I like to sing also. That's one of my little things. Today, I'm really excited to welcome a most incredible person, Jess Hendricks here, hailing from Kentucky. She and I met last year at the Sales Enablement Society experience. We'd been, networking and whatnot in similar circles for a hot minute, but we got to meet in person last year, and it was, instant connection there. And she had been doing a topic similar to this, and it just it skyrocketed. It was an incredible conversation. And so we've been keeping in touch, and I wanted to make sure that we were furthering the conversation and expanding it to some who may not have been able to go last year as well. This isn't going to be exactly like it was last year. It will be a little bit more 2.0 evolved version of it. And our topic is the skills assessments and the competency analysis. So before we get started on that, I'd love to see a little bit more about where everybody sits at the moment with your skills assessment framework. If you've never used Slido before, all you have to do is either scan the QR code or go to slido.com and type in that number. Just want to give a quick minute to see where people are at for where they're at in the construction, if there is one, of your framework. We've got a few people coming in. We've got some getting through the process of creating it. We've got some yays, some nays. Nobody's actually here because they love Sales Enablement Society. Just kidding. we know that's the secondary one anyways. So, thank you, Allison. While we're getting some of these poll results going real quick, I just want to remind everybody, this is going to be a conversation. This isn't a webinar. We do want to hear from you. If you are open to coming off of mute and not sharing your screen, but showing your face, we would love to see it. If not, that's fine too. But this is a conversation. We encourage questions. Instead of just coming off mute to ask a question, please, do our usual hand raise, or you can, if you're not comfortable coming off mute, just throw it into the chat. Happy to be monitoring that. Oh my goodness, we were almost like an even split through it all, but it looks like the majority of folks here are in the process of creating their skills assessments and competency analysis. A couple who have done it or have it in place, and others who haven't. Again, everybody I know loves SES, so we're going to roll with that one as the winner. But all right, I'm going to hand the mic over to Jess Hendricks, so she can get started here.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Give me 1 second to get my desktop pulled up, and just let me confirm that everybody can see my screen.
Sure can. All right. One of our first questions from Sasha is curious how you can get buy-in from sales management. So I'm sure that'll be a part of it down the road here.
Yep. So I'm actually going to put a pin in that if it's okay, Shannon.
Yeah, of course.
We'll back to that in a few minutes. And
let's get started.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you everybody for allowing me to come and just kind of lead this conversation today. It's one of my favorite topics. I'm super excited about it. Yes, this is me in this picture. I just have dyed my hair blonde for the summertime. So, but thank you guys for having me. Just a little bit of background on me before we jump into the discussion topic. So I've been in enablement since about 2014. I actually started the first enablement position in my in the health tech company that I was in at the time. I loved selling, but I actually loved enabling more. So that's what kind of led me into this role that I absolutely love. I'm currently on a bit of a sabbatical, so taking a little bit of a break from the corporate world, which just trying to refresh and spend some time. I have a daughter, and still doing some side projects, but loving every minute of it, and loving being able to take the opportunity to come into conversations like this and just kind of give some people some insights on how I've done some of these things in the past and how I've seen success in them, and hope that you can take some little tidbits away from that and be able to implement that into your own organization. So with that, I'm excited to get started. So our discussion topics for today, really three different things or three different areas that I want to focus on. So the first area is, what do skills assessments do? The second piece is, why should we use skills assessments, which it looked like based off of the Slido, like a lot of you are using them today or in the process of thinking about using them. So I'm really glad that you're joining us, because I think this will be a great time to have that conversation. And then last but certainly not least, how do you build that sales skills assessment, and how do you make sure that it's centered on your organization and it's going to actually impact your organization? As I do want to say, as Shannon mentioned as well, I definitely built this deck so that we could have conversations. So please raise your hand, come off mute, and just ask questions to help get us through this conversation. Otherwise, I don't think you guys want to just hear a talking head for the next 50 minutes. So please, I love to have conversations. It's what drives me. So just wanted to put that out there. All right. So jumping right in here, the first thing, the first point here is, what do skills assessments do? So skills assessments really set the foundation for a learning culture. They truly drive real growth and engagement to help impact company revenue. So I kind of bucket this into three different components as to exactly how do we get to that point of, what do they do? So they identify the gaps through defined levels of skill behaviors. They quantify the impact of those behaviors using metrics and data. I love data. I love using data. I love proving points with data. So I'll talk a lot about data. It really does, the data in these skills assessments actually ties back to, well, we just made a lot of sales this year, but we're not really sure how. Well, guess what? A sales skills assessment actually gives you the data to quantify that. So, and then of course the analyzation piece. So they help to analyze behavioral performance and progression over time. So how your reps are performing, where you see areas of opportunities and areas of needs, and then how to address that. So we'll talk about all of those things through the next little bit. But at the highest level, I feel like they identify, quantify, and analyze are really the three main components of like what skills assessments do. All right, so moving right along. Maybe.
I love that you are like, I love metrics. I'm like, pretty sure everybody in enablement has to have like a little place in their heart for metrics and quantifying, impact, right?
100%. A side note on that, I remember once a couple of years ago, I had a boss that was basically said, enablement is an overhead cost to the organization. And I can't tell you that there's ever been a statement that was made that stung me more, because while we may be an overhead cost, if we are used in the right way, we are actually revenue generation just as well as a seller is revenue generation. So I've fought long and hard to be able to prove that. So hopefully some of the things that you can take away from this will help you make that case and prove that story if that's something that you're dealing with today as well. All right. So why are assessments necessary? So a couple of different things as to why assessments are necessary. A lot of the times when we make decisions, or when the business makes a decision, like we just don't have enough data to make the decision. So, as things are going to market, as things are launching, yes, there may be market research that has been done, all of the things to, basically forecasting and pipeline generation. However, when it comes to sellers, without having that data in place to provide where the sellers are excelling and where they're falling short, it's hard to actually be able to quantify why those decisions are being made or if they're being made in the most appropriate way. So critical decisions are made every single day on inadequate and insufficient data. So their skills assessments are necessary to help kind of fill that gap. The second piece, organizational priorities are consistently changing. Raise your hand if you guys are just status quo as a business and never have to pivot ever. Yeah, okay, that's what I thought. So, right. So organizational priorities are consistently changing, but when you have a skills assessment in place that follows your sales motion, your sales methodology, that has your reps set up for success, even though the organizational priorities are consistently changing, the skills assessments should be pretty substantial in adequate across the board to be able to quantify how to take on some of those consistent pivots in changing of the priorities in an organization. This is another big one, as you know, I mentioned just a second ago, expectation versus understanding how required skill levels are being executed. I'm sure we've all heard the sales manager that says, well, you know, Tiffany's a great seller. I don't know how she does what she does. She just closes business. She's our number one revenue, you know, driver of, you know, biggest sales rep on the team. We don't really know how to duplicate her or create more Tiffany's or whatever the case may be. So being able to take what your top sellers are doing and the skills that they're actually executing and create a framework around some of those behaviors, not all of them, but some of those behaviors will absolutely be able to provide sales enablement and sales leadership, probably more importantly, of here's how we expect people to be performing versus how they're actually performing. And then, of course, the old saying, you know, you just don't know what you don't know. I know that Heather is the number one sales rep and she just closes business, but I'm not sure how she does that. So being able to, again, quantify that to be able to provide that value and that data. So the value of a skills assessment is that it provides the data to explain capabilities and performance. So assessments identify where the gaps are and what leaders need to do about those gaps. So I'll pause there. Any questions or thoughts on that before I move on? No?
I know I'll say that, you know, something that I've noticed across many organizations is exactly what you were just mentioning about where there are top performers that are a complete mystery, right? Or they are, you know, the managers just say like, let them do what they do. We'll do the rest with everyone else. And we're like, no, but we need that insight to help get everybody else up to speed. You know, having 20% of your selling, you know, sales force actually performing versus the other 80. Like, what's the other 80 doing? You should have. It'd be ideal to be able to get everybody into either middle or higher ground for that tier, maybe.
Absolutely. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second, but Shannon, I think you make a great point. Like your biggest areas of opportunity from an execution perspective are your middlemen or your middle women, the people that are in the middle there, that if you just upskill them just a bit more, then they're actually going to start performing the way that the rock star performers are. So I'm going to jump back in for just a second. So let's talk at a very high level, because there's about 1.5 million pieces that go into this, but at the highest level, how to build the assessment. So the first one, and again, let me actually, before I jump in here, let me give some context. I've now rolled this out at 2 different companies, and this entire process on the how to build piece took between 3 to 6 months. So it's not like there's a magic wand that's going to be waved and this is going to be done overnight. There's a lot of cross-functional and moving parts that have to go into this. So just have that understanding going in that this is not something that we can, or that you would be able to turn around unless you have all of the core components, but still being able to get the buy-in and everything like that. It's going to take some time. So I just wanted to preface that it does take a little bit of time to pull all of this together and to actually build a true working machine here. Okay, so step 1, define your sales process in motion. So you want to make sure that you're working with sales leadership and sales operations to define and document every single stage, every single opportunity stage, every step, every action, every gate, and every single person that's responsible for those actions and those gates and those stages within your entire sales motion. I've got some examples of this that I'll show as I break this down here in just a few minutes. But that's your number one. You know, I would hope that, I would say majority of organizations do have some type of sales motion, but a lot of the times when I talk to organizations, their sales motion is more heavier on the Salesforce or the operational side, which is great. That's definitely a big piece of it, but without having explicit identification of the responsible parties, i.e. like, what are the SDRs doing? Where do they step in? What are their responsibilities? Where do they step out? Where does the AE take over? Things of that nature, without having that fully documented so that those expectations are set appropriately. This just doesn't work as well. So just something to bear in mind. So the
Jessica,
second,
sorry,
yes.
real quick. What do you mean by gate?
Yeah, great question. So what I mean by gate within that, I know that the two organizations that I've worked with on this, we had Salesforce gates. So like, unless we had a
Required, like,
exactly. So like we had a discovery document with specific fields. One of those things that was like very heavy was like the medic. They had to complete all of the medic fields in Salesforce. Otherwise, wouldn't be able to advance the opportunity to stage 3.
Okay, I didn't want to make an assumption, but I figured it would be like entry exit criteria kind of thing. And then Crystal had a question. Oh, she raised her hand and now she's gone.
I'm good. Thank you.
You're good? And then Sasha says, don't ask whether the sales process is aligned with the buyer's journey.
So I'll get to that in a minute, because I did actually kind of call that out a little bit, but I'll get to that here in just a second, as best that I can. I'll just say as best that I can. All right, so the second step here that I have is define your core competencies. The way that I define core competencies as part of the overall assessment is I kind of think of them as buckets. So for example, in the example I'll show here in a minute, there's 6 different stages, and there are 3 competencies, and there's 2 stages for each competency. So for example, if you think about like your typical sales motion, you've got like discovery, qualification, and closing. Now you can call those buckets whatever works best for your organization. I've even seen some organizations that have like a qualification model before discovery and then closing. But just for all intents and purposes, I try to think about it in, your core competencies are your highest level. So there's those 3 different buckets there. So what are those 3 different buckets that are going to be required to execute within the sales process? So, in the beginning, typically your reps are doing some type of discovery. In the middle of the sales cycle, they're typically qualifying or quantifying the opportunity. And then at the end, they're obviously closing that opportunity. So what are those 3 competency buckets that you want to make sure that the sales reps are actually executing within the overall sales process? Next up, we have the skills piece. So defining each skill. So which skills are required to execute the core competencies? Again, I've got this blown out here in just a few minutes, but if you think about discovery, like what are the skills that a rep needs for within your organization to effectively do discovery? What are the skills that a rep needs to effectively qualify an opportunity? So that's what I mean when I talk about making sure that you've identified which skills go into which competency bucket. Next up, we've got defining each behavior level. So even though it's pretty tedious and time consuming, this is probably one of my favorite portions of it. So identifying, let's see, we've got the skills. Why didn't that come up? Sorry, there we go. Sorry, I don't know why that didn't pop up. So defining the behavior level. So making sure that you have written out the different behavior levels that would be executed for each skill. So these are what the rep is doing. So an observable behavior of how the rep is executing this skill. Again, I'll get into that here in just a few minutes as I go on. And then 5, and probably the most important piece, is the piece on alignment. So defining the levels of alignment. So taking those buckets from the competency level to the skill level to the behavior level, and then applying it to your overall sales motion. So again, this is not something that happens overnight. This is not something that happens over a week. It definitely takes time. It definitely takes a lot of work and effort, a lot of buy-in, a lot of cross-functional conversations. And but once it's there, once it's in place, and once it's running, it works very, very well. So I'll pause there before I jump into each one of these steps. If you guys have any questions, hopefully not, maybe so.
Yeah, I have one.
Oh, Sasha, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, do you start with a particular role? I wrote it in the chat as well, or like the account executives or BSDRs because they are simpler, or do you take all the roles all at once?
I start with a particular role. And interestingly enough, the first time that I did this, I actually realized that I needed to start at the management role because, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a few minutes, but starting with them and getting their buy-in and getting their voice as part of this overall project or initiative was the most critical. And so then as I brought them along the way in building this, they were very instrumental. And I honestly could not have done it without them for building out like the actual execution piece of the account executives. So the assessments that I've created to this point have been based on account executives. And then what I've done, especially since I've had teams in the past that have looked after the sales development or the like solutions consultants, I've had them kind of take the account executive framework and then cater it a little bit more towards whether it's the SDR role, which would be heavier on the discovery or the front end of the sales cycle, and then the SC role, which is heavier on like the qualification and the closing side of the sales cycle. So hopefully that answers your question. And Shannon, were you going to ask something too?
Sasha, did you want to say something else in there?
No, just thank you. And it's interesting to hear that you started with sales management because that was my buy-in issue that I had. They didn't want to do anything, basically. It's just provided to me.
Yeah, that's unfortunately pretty common. So, and I'll talk a little bit about that too when I talk about buy-in in a few minutes as well.
Well, I'm curious, for those who did put in the poll that they either have theirs completed or they're in the middle of kind of creating it, more or less, which stage are you all in? I'd love to hear like how many of you have already gotten through the defining the process and competencies. Maybe you're at the defining skills at this point. Where for anyone who did answer that they're halfway through, where are you at on this? More or less.
Shannon, I'd love to share that I think we're kind of in an interesting place because while we have it defined and we've had something that's working, I wanted to show up to find out, hey, how can we improve it? Because we're looking at, actually going back and refining. And so having some new people come on board, I see the define your core competencies in number 2. And that's where one of our kind of like a person who's in a people and sales related role and kind of an interesting space where she's looking to try and integrate different capabilities and competencies across the board. I'm like, wow, we can absolutely bring this into the assessment aside from all the work that's going on. So it's for us, I would say it's coming back and revisiting. So while we may have, steps 1 through 5, looking at this here, gosh, there's a real opportunity to come back and revisit and refine all the way back to even step 1 in some cases, but really it's step 2 for us.
Yeah, I love to like what you said about, and I'll talk a little bit about this too, but the only way I have ever been able to see success with this is partnering with human resources, like absolutely, to make sure that there's a standardization in place so that when things like a PIP come along or a promotion or anything like that, like this is actually going to get used to leverage that because it's the standard across the board. It's not just some fluffy little thing that Enablement came up with. It's actually used in practice, and it's used to not only elevate revenue for the company, but also elevate like the actual performance, either, what was I going to say? Either, promoting someone up or managing someone out. So absolutely multiple opportunities to be able to use this. So it's not just, like I said, it's not just a fluffy little enablement exercise that sales managers don't want to use. All right, so let's dive into these a little bit more. So the first one that I mentioned.
I have one more question. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, you're fine.
How did you operationalize your motion, your skills and competency assessments? Because doing it once is a lot of effort. Doing it once a quarter is even more effort, right? And you certainly don't want to burden everyone with it. On the other side, you have a lot of data in different systems. And that's a discussion that I had with E4 Enable. How can we operationalize this process and have tools and systems working for us? How did you do that?
So I'll talk a little bit about that right now, but I may actually table that for a little bit later in the conversation too. But we actually, when we operationalized this, we used SalesHood to do it. At one of the companies that I've worked at, and then we've also used Gong to operationalize it as well. I am a big fan of using the technology that's in place, even though that might not be what it's meant to do. It still can provide valuable data, and I don't like just going out and creating spreadsheets where people are manually entering in information, so that, you know, it's kind of more of a one-stop shop. So those are two of the tools that I've used in the past, and I'll talk a little bit more about timing of how we did that and again, that kind of goes back to the expectations piece. So I'll table that for just a minute, but I'll talk about that here in just a couple minutes.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so sales process in motion. So you have to make sure that you're working with your cross-functional teams to capture, yes, absolutely capturing your customer's journey, but more so really honing in on making sure that that sales process is captured and that all of the lead and opportunity stages are clearly defined. So I've got on here just at like the highest level, you know, at a couple of the organizations that I've worked at in the past, what this looks like. I apologize, some of my, oh yeah, it's showing up. I'm not sure why that looks like that. Anyways, but you know, what I tend to do is, even at the highest level, and I think a lot of organizations do have this mapped out in some capacity, but just making sure that you kind of start up at the, you know, the 3,000 foot view and then start to work your way back or work your way down to get to the very on boots on the ground view of what this actually looks like and how to actually build this out. So again, like I said, highest level view and moving along. And this is just an example. And I'll get to the core competencies in a second. But as you build this out, making sure that you've got your stages clearly defined, you've got obviously your probabilities, your in-stage activities, your exit criteria, and having all of those mapped out so that everybody understands the expectations that they need to be executing as part of every step and every stage within the process. So as far as the core competencies goes, as I mentioned just a second ago, you can kind of see here how I've bucketed it out. So you've got discovery, which is at the front end of the sales cycle. I like to say stage 0 just because of the company that I was working at when I built this out. Before we actually had an opportunity created, it was a lead. So anyway, stage 0 for discovery, and then once we had qualified, yes, this is an opportunity, then moving into the qualification stage, and then also moving into the closing, or I shouldn't say stage, I should say the qualification competencies, and then the closing competencies. So this is the way that I've kind of bucketed the competencies at the highest level, and aligning them to the overall motion and the actual operational execution of the sales motion. So oh, I'm sorry, I don't know why there we go. So the steps to actually, or the skills to actually execute for this particular organization, the discovery component. So what are the skills? And this is what you want to think about here. When you have reps that are practicing discovery, actively doing discovery with your prospects, what are the skills that you are looking for? And one thing that I cannot, I guess, scream from the mountaintops loud enough is that this is going to be it should be a combination of soft and hard skills. So I think a lot of the times when we talk about soft skills, especially in my experience, sales leaders kind of, there's some eye rolling or just some like, but soft skills actually are what make sales reps be able to do their job effectively. So it is absolutely a huge component of being able to build this out. So for discovery, and again, these are just examples of what worked for this organization, but being able to authentically listen, being able to build trust, having business acumen, planning an organization, as well as being naturally curious and being able to ask questions. So the skills in the qualification bucket, I've got learning mindset, the product knowledge, the ability to understand what they're selling and be able to speak to it knowledgeably, understanding the overall sales process, value and differentiation. So being able to differentiate as part of that qualification mechanism. And then of course, being able to build consensus with the customer. And then the third bucket, of course, the closing. So being able to handle objections, let's see here, being able to be assertive. And I want to make sure to call it that's assertive and not aggressive. And there is a very big difference between the two of those. Negotiation, emotion management, and then of course, resilience. One thing, a question that I always get about this is, well, Jessica, they're getting objections in discovery. And I 100% agree. They absolutely will be getting objections within discovery as well. But just for all intents and purposes of where it's, I shouldn't say most important, but like where does this best fit in the bucket? Objection handling actually may fit best in discovery for your organization. Absolutely. So they, they should obviously be managing their emotions in every single stage, and they should always be naturally curious. But in order to segment it and bucket everything appropriately, this is just the best way that I found to be able to bucket it into these different things. So I know, Sasha, you'd ask a question a few minutes ago, like, when do you do this? Where do you do this? How do you do this? Whatever. What I found works best is, especially like in this last company that we were working with, when using Gong, understanding where the opportunity was. So for example, if the opportunity was in qualification, there was a specific scorecard that we used to allow them to do use the qualification competencies, and making sure that they had those competencies, they were executing that on that call. Now the same customer a week or two later, that may be a closing call or like a stage 5 opportunity, and we would apply the closing competency assessment for them as well. So
I feel like there's an opportunity, like you're just mentioning with, objection handling, on where it kind of sits in here. I feel like there are a couple of these that could, again, be kind of moved around or maybe duplicated, right? The objections that you're going to get in the discovery are going to be those really high level ones that everybody kind of gets, where no budget, no time, no person, whatever it is, right? But then but then as you go further through the sales cycle, right, there's the objections get a little bit harder to overcome, if you will, or a bit more specific. And I think I think there's an opportunity there to have it living in a couple of places, right? Like, are you able to handle that discovery level objection handling versus the closing? Because they're two very different styles of objections.
Absolutely. And I think that's absolutely. I think that's a great point to call out as well, because you can do this in a couple of different ways. You can have all of these skills like applied to like one phone call, right? And if it's a discovery call and they're not talking about negotiation and a discovery call, then like there's always an option, or there should always be an option for like NA. So it doesn't apply. So it doesn't necessarily hurt the seller, but it doesn't give them any type of rating as to how that was applied during that conversation. So it really just depends on how you operationalize this in totality. So
before you move on, real quick, just a question about, well, this might come as part of this, but when you're analyzing the skills, right? You have the hard skills, the soft skills. Now it's hard skills are super teachable. Soft skills are a little bit more difficult to do that. Is that something that you leave to enablement to to help develop that, or is that something that is a manager? Like, where does that development live?
Great question. I'm gonna steal one from my girl Siobhan because I love her and she's probably one of my favorite human beings in the whole wide world. But her motto or her tagline is the responsible to, not for. So my opinion is that if we provide the enablement for soft skills, so for example, last year I did like a listening and a curiosity workshop. So if I provide the enablement for that and the reps come to that, then it's then on the sales managers to be accountable for ensuring that their reps attend, that their reps are practicing what they learned within those workshops. So we can do all of the best and greatest enablement in the entire world. But guess what? If the reps don't do it, nothing we can do.
It's all for naught.
I'm sure nobody's ever experienced that either, right? So, going back to the skill or the like, just identifying the skills, making sure that they're defined and how the organization is expected to have these reps execute this. So for example, I know I mentioned, back at the beginning, I've had to work with sales managers to from the get-go to say, okay, look, here are the 5 skills that we're going to bucket into the discovery, competency, authentic listening, building trust, business acumen, planning and organization, and curiosity. So I, from a hodgepodge and plethora of different things, have come up with these definitions as to what I think that these look like, or how I think that these things should be defined. And then I work with sales managers to allow them to edit and to allow them to basically make sure that everyone's definition is aligned with what the sales managers and the CRO's expectations are of how we are defining this. So I kind of use that as an opportunity to let them have a voice, to let them feel like they're absolutely included in this conversation, in this like creation of this project. But then it also helps to foster that level of accountability that then they're going to have moving forward when they start applying these. So, hey, Thomas, you helped us build the building trust definition of that skill. So now you're saying every single person on your team is a 5, like that it's probably not making sense there, right? So bringing them along the way and building out all of these definitions, and then of course the behavior levels too, which I'll talk about in a second, is absolutely critical to being able to execute this and execute this well. And also not just the sales managers, but also human resources as well, making sure that they're aware and they have some oversight into how we're defining these things as well.
I'm curious if this would fall under behaviors or not, so I might be getting a moment ahead of myself, but I know that I have, a rep on one of our sales teams who, when you watch him do discovery or anything, or listen to him do discovery, it sounds like he's really authentically listening. But I noticed after, at first I was like so impressed. I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy really gets it. And then I noticed he was just mirroring, right? He was just mimicking. So it was literally just, oh, you are having an issue with this. Yes, tell me more about that, right? Like, instead of, because I see on under authentic, for example, authentic listening, you say like adding new information. So I'm curious, like, if there is a seller who is very strong at mimicking, but maybe not adding more to it, where does that kind of sit? Or is this where the behavior is?
I would actually absolutely define that's a behavior, and we'll talk about that next slide. But I think is there a question, Sasha?
Yes. Do you have a recommendation for the number of skills? Because you can pick out of a catalog of so many skills.
True.
Do you stop at 5 or 6 and that's it because it gets easier to handle?
So at the first organization that I rolled this out at, I had 7 per competency. I got a lot of pushback. I got a lot of pushback on having to analyze 21 different skills. And so that's when I started to kind of, I don't want to say hodgepodge because that's not the right word, but I started to kind of try to combine as much as I could and consolidate so that it didn't feel as heavy, because 15 is more manageable than 21, which I'm sure they're like, oh, well, I can only do 3. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, then that's not going to give us enough quantifiable information that we can use. But like, find the sweet spot that, you know, you could, like, let's be honest, we could probably come up with 15 for each core competency. But what you want to do is make it come up with a number that's manageable and that everyone can agree on, that they will all be responsible for and be able to be accountable for as part of the overall process. That's again, they're probably not ever going to be super happy, but you know, let's get 70% of the way there. All right, so next up, Shannon, behavior levels. So again, Rome wasn't built in a day. This isn't going to get built in a day, right? So now I've got 5 skills per each competency, and now I get to create 5 different behavior levels. So what do I mean when I say behavioral levels? This is, Shannon, to your point a second ago, this is the observable behavior that you or the sales manager will actually be observing them practice in either like on a gong call, on a recording, in real time, however you decide to actually operationalize it. But these are actual observable behaviors. So level 1 is that the level 1 observable behavior is that they're learning the skill. So there's not enough substantial information, evidence, or observations to quantify the application of the skill. Individuals may be new or experiencing organizational changes that directly impact the knowledge of standard practice. So again, new hires probably going to be operating at a level 1. If you have a brand new, net new go-to-market product, then there's probably going to be some on this like one lower end because they're still learning about that product. So they may not be as confident practicing curiosity as they would with something that they've been selling for 3 years. So level 1 is learning. Level 2 is attempting. So attempting the skill, there's substantiated information, evidence, and or observable instances to quantify an effort to apply the skill. Individuals attempt the skill, but are not consistent in executing a standard practice. So again, this may also be a new hire that's kind of starting to get comfortable with like speaking to the products. This may be someone that's struggling with some of the things that, you know, if there's a new product that they're rolling out, like they just don't know all the questions that they need to ask, but they're attempting it, but they're not consistent with it, which is level 3 is executing. So consistent execution of the skill. So there's substantiated information, evidence, and or observable instances to quantify execution of the skill. Individuals consistently apply the skill as standard practice. So I know if I go watch a gong recording of Barbara, like every single time, like she's asking the right questions, she's listening, she's not just mirroring. She's got the business acumen piece down in her conversations. She's got it down. So that's that level 3 that they're executing. Now, level 4 I have is impacting. So not only are they every single time practicing that skill, they're effectively using it. So there's substantiated information, evidence, and or observable instances to quantify effective execution of the skill. The individual consistently and effectively applies the skill as standard practice. So not only are they doing it consistently, they're doing it consistently well. So for example, like if you have a new hire and I have Barbara over here that's like asks the best questions and is a great listener, I might place my new hire with Barbara as a mentor because she's probably at that level for that particular skill. And then, of course, I have level 5 is excelling. So excellent and consistent execution and effective use and influence of the skill. So there's substantiated information, evidence, and or observable instances to quantify excellence and execution of the skill. Individual consistency and effectiveness of the skill application directly influence on standard practice, setting the example of this skill. So, the one point that I want to call out here is that if you have a seller that's consistently getting 5s in core competency areas, they're probably either that lone wolf seller that's your rock star seller, number one, or number two, they may be ready for a promotion or a different job, or just depending on where they are. But 5 is really, they are the best of the best, the cream of the crop. And, the organization actually might be scared that they're going to lose them. They always get what they want because they're the top, whatever. But all of that to say, target area should be a level 3. So this comes as a sticker shock sometimes to sales managers. And it's like, oh, but Marsha's the best. Like she's a 5 across the board. Well, then that obviously calls for a conversation, because the most of our sales reps we want them to be at a level 3. You want them to be between a level 3 and a level 4. So that means they're actually executing in practice in real time, or they're actually influencing that skill within the sales motion. So I'll pause there because I know I just talked a lot. Do you guys have any questions about this before I move on?
Sasha just literally like read my mind on this, where he's just said we've asked level 5 people to teach others, and it was a component of level 5. And I was literally thinking the same thing. Like maybe it's, it is that part of it isn't. I know on here you have like influences and sets the example. Like maybe that is the extra step of it is are they not only executing but teaching others how to get there?
Yeah, absolutely. Because this is what you want. This is what good looks like, right? This is exactly what good looks like. And your level 5s are the ones that, as you build out these behaviors, that you want them to help you define this. So like, what is it that they're doing so working with them to get their buy-in and to help you define what this looks like. So those are definitely your level 5s here.
Yeah. And Caroline mentioned, having either formal teaching or a peer-to-peer mentorship, something that would be a really interesting way to leverage this person and kind of keep them feeling like they're still like loved and wanted, is inviting them maybe as an SME, right? On an onboarding and in skills development, or as a spotlight, hey, this month we wanted to spotlight the skills spotlight of the month. We want to spotlight Sasha on, being able to have this incredible, or I'm gonna use the authentic listening because that's the one that I was thinking about before, but, being able to explain to others what makes this person so successful, and like one of the skills that gets there, and it could inspire others to want to be like, well, actually, that's an area that I could improve on as well.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, I just realized what time it was. So
obviously, I was just going to say 10-minute mark.
Well, so my apologies on that. So I just wanted to throw up an example, since we're on authentic listening, of kind of what this looks like as I've defined it in the past. So I've got my competency here. I've got the name of the skill, the definition of the skill. And then again, this is the piece that takes quite a bit of our time in creating this, is defining every single observable behavior. So all 5 observable behaviors. So this is, in my opinion, one of the most important steps, mainly because if I kind of use this as, if I'm looking at a sales rep that maybe their sales manager scored them as a 5, and then I can go to like 3 or 4 of their phone calls and be like, well, they're not consistent in it. So that should have been a level 2. And if there, becomes a point of contention there, just saying, hey, well, based off of our, how we define this, they're just attempting to show interest and be free of distractions. They're not consistent and effective. Every single time they're having a conversation, they're not at a level 5. They're actually just at a level 2. So this is like the driver, in my opinion, to be able to quantify the scores of every single time that I go and I pull a call, or I rate a call, or I see a rep in practice. This is actually how they are executing those skills. So this is the level at which they're executing those skills. Yes, ma'am. Crystal, you had a question before I. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I didn't have a question, but just to circle back to what your original point was, where you had talked about starting with sales leadership. And in my experience, that's why it's so critical to start with sales leadership when doing these competencies, led type training, coaching, is that if the managers are able to see how they are scored by their leaders. If you start this whole process at the top, they then have a better understanding of how to actually score their reps, eliminating quite a bit of bias. There always will be a level of bias in this because we're human beings. And you know, for an enablement team to be able to go and spot check every, you know, sales rep, it's not scalable. But I think if you can show them, you know, before you actually rolling this out to ICs, it makes things a lot easier.
100% agree with you. And I can tell you at both organizations that I've rolled this out with, that when we did this, I spent time, or my team spent time with every single sales manager to actually take what in their mind, who was their top performer and who was their bottom performer. And myself and my team went through and actually did the first assessment with them to say, okay, why is Brittany, like, you know, you think she's a 3 at authentic listening? Like, well, let's, if I went and pulled calls, like, are you sure, you know, what have you? But just to kind of give them like that devil's advocate of saying like, here's what this should look like, and kind of working through that process with them before then just saying, okay, now you've got 6 other reps to go complete this assessment on. That was instrumental in making sure that, you know, there's always going to be some type of a bias, but at least setting the expectation at the very beginning was super helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, just a couple minutes left. So the alignment piece, which I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this, but just this is like kind of putting it all together, right? So you've got your buckets, you've got your stages, you've got, or your core competency buckets, you've got your stages defined and outlined, you've got your sales skills, as well as the behaviors that live within each of those. And when like I said it earlier, and that we were discussing, you know, observable behaviors may or may not be applicable in each stage. It just really depends on how you, from an operational perspective, want to roll this out, how you want that to look and show up, whether it's, you know, all 15 that you want to be able to apply to every single call, or if it's, hey, I knew this was a, you know, a stage 1 opportunity, so I'm only going to apply these 5 to this call. It really just depends on what your level of comfortability is, and truly what your, what you can get your sales managers to agree to as part of the process as well. All right, so before, just a couple of quick things before you start your assessment, you want to make sure that that alignment is so key. It's so key. So making sure that the entire sales organization is informed and understands all of their roles and responsibilities. So I've outlined 6 different things here that I want you, like, if you don't take away anything, to take this away, because as you're doing this, just something to keep top of mind. So, you know, what tools are you going to use to be able to assess and report out? I'm happy to, if you guys have questions about this and what I used and how I did all of this, I'm happy to have conversations after this, but just for the sake of time, I'm going to keep rolling right now. All right. So number 2, the assessment frequency. What stakeholders need to be involved, and are they bought in, and how frequently you're going to be doing these assessments? The reporting cadence. So how frequently are you going to be reporting out to the stakeholders? What do they expect to get? Like, what's that information look like in those reports? Nobody wants just a bunch of data. So how are you going to kind of pull all of that together and then present that to your stakeholders as well? And then number 4, which is one of my favorites, is the mitigation and plan of action. So as enablement practitioners, what training and coaching are we going to be providing for those areas of need that we have discovered through this assessment process? And then, of course, again, time is so valuable. How are we going to prioritize that? So how are you going to prioritize the enablement if there's a bunch of areas of opportunity and a bunch of like an entire team is not doing, you know, practicing or executing specific skills well? How are you going to prioritize all of the different sales managers that want to focus on all of these different things? And then, of course, number 6 is, again, setting expectations appropriately. So how are you going to be able to set that responsibility and the accountability expectations? Because again, we can provide all the enablement in the world, but without the sales managers being accountable for executing these assessments, and then, you know, once we have that enablement in place, ensuring that the reps are actually completing the enablement ongoing and putting that into practice as well. So I just ran through that very quickly. So hope.
That's great.
Key takeaways, again, just kind of going back to the beginning of the conversation, identifying the gaps through the defined levels of skill behaviors, quantifying the impact of behaviors using the metrics and data, and of course, analyzing the behavioral performance and progression over time. So skills assessments provide the data to explain capabilities and rep performance, and they identify the gaps and inform enablement and leaders what is required to impact revenue. So that's all I got. I got 2 minutes left.
Awesome.
Happy to take any questions.
I know folks are going to be jumping off here real quick, but before everyone goes, just a reminder, the enablement experience, sales enablement experience is like 10 days away in San Diego. We hope to see you there. A recording of this will also be available on our SES Chicago YouTube, probably in the next couple of hours. I will try and get it up by end of day today. So if you want to come back and revisit this, it'll be there. I'll make sure the link is posted in the event. Just wanted to real quick plug before we got there. Does anyone have any questions before we jump off, or any feedback, maybe what your biggest takeaway was?
Yeah, let's
No.
meet on the experience and have a drink together.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
we can talk more about skill assessment. Thank you very much, Jessica.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do it. Happy to be able to have some conversation with you guys today.
And before I forget, for anyone that is in Chicago, we are going to be having a live event as well on October, I believe it's 19th, where we are going to be doing kind of a sticky solutions, where we're going to be working on creating a charter. That one. I knew I would forget that if I didn't plug that real quick too. Jessica, this was absolutely incredible. I've missed this and I loved this. And I can tell you this has been one of my, favorite that I've been to in a hot minute. So much to take away with this. And everyone, I recommend, if you aren't already connected to Jess, give her a connect on LinkedIn. I'm sure she doesn't mind having someone reach out and pick her brain a little bit.
Absolutely. Hit me up. I'm happy to help. Happy to just have a conversation. Makes me happy.
Thank you. And